Joy Reid and Don Lemon, cast-offs, one from CNN, the other from MSNBC. Man, they are struggling to make it out here in these YouTube streets and just away from the corporate media legacy. They've been saying some really, really crazy things, and we're going to bring on Shamika, Chad Jackson, Virgil, and Wilfred Riley to talk about it. Let's start with Don Lemon, a classic, love the fruit, hate the tree Negro. He's married to a white man, but he thinks white men are broken, or a white man has broken Don Lemon is probably more accurate. Let's play SOT number 11. Here's Don Lemon.
Men who look like you, men who vote like you, and men who sound like you. White men, something is broken. Something is cracked deep inside when so many of you believe the answer to fear, to loss, to change is violence. Are you listening to me? I hope I'm saying it loud enough for the people in the back.
That's such an incredibly stupid and easy to refute, rebuke, retort. It's just, I don't, Don Lemon has always been difficult for me to understand. This feels almost intentionally stupid so that he can be mocked and ridiculed by people that disagree with him, so that he can spark a conversation about, because people start coming, have you looked at the statistics on the violence among black men? Did you look at the violence that happened as a result of George Floyd and Jacob Blake and Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Eric Garner, so on and so forth? Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? Here's the second one, and this is from Joy Reid, equally as stupid. This is Joy Reid describing fascism and how Donald Trump and MAGA is going to return us to fascism. Let's play SOT 12.
Is that if you go back before the 20th century, there were no income taxes, there were no regulations on business. You could earn as much money as you want, leave 100% of it to your children with no taxes. Right. That's the world they want back. And to get it back, they need society to change. They need people to be less modern. They need people to want fewer things.
Joy Reid almost, when I heard that, I was like, is she talking about heaven? No taxes? I get to earn as much as I want? I get to leave it to my family? Man, that sounds awesome. When we say make America great again, if that's what they're talking about, man, sign me up immediately. Let's get to our panel without further ado. Wilfred is the voice we haven't heard from the longest. So we'll start with Wilfred. Wilfred, who's made the dumber statement here, Don Lemon or Joy Reid?
I'd probably, it's tough competition, but I'd probably have to say Joy Reid. You know, Don Lemon, I mean, I think everyone on the panel knows this, but, you know, crime is high across the board in the USA. But if you look at murder, black murder rate, 7 times the white murder rate. So, I mean, there are some white-dominated crimes, too, but that's an absurd racist thing to say. But Joy Reid, yeah, I mean, first of all, she doesn't know what fascism is. I mean, fascism is, you know, it's a system, business and government working together, blah, blah, blah. But secondarily, Jason, I mean, we're on the right here. So, I mean, when you said this sounds like heaven, you kind of stole my joke. I mean, she went through, you're not going to pay taxes. The government's not going to be involved in every aspect of life. You can leave 100% of your money to your son or your little girl. I mean, I would be very comfortable, you know, keep basic laws against murder, some race stuff in place. I'd be very comfortable going back to that world. So I'd have to give the award to Joy.
Shamika, who's the dumbest here?
Well, I would say Don confused me because when he talked about something being broke, I didn't know if he meant broke off, like in him, he was breaking it off in his white male partner. I wasn't sure. But as far as the dumbest, it would definitely be Joy. You know, I've seen a lot of women dye their hair bleach blonde because trying to hide the grays. And I've been thinking about it, but now I'm wondering if that bleach is seeping into her brain and just causing her to sound real dumb. That was the silliest thing she said. And I thought what she said about Charlie Kirk when she thought she was revealing something deep and hidden when she talked about the man who actually helped him get started with Turning Point. But I think this one took the cake.
All right. Joy Reid, the leader in the clubhouse. Chad, you agree that Joy Reid dumber than Don Lemon here?
Well, first, let me just say that I feel like I finally made it since I'm on a panel with the great and hilarious Shamika Michelle. And it's cool to see, I guess, a sixth panelist on the panel with Wilfred's cat. So there's that. It is I don't know. I think they're kind of tied. It's interesting because with Don Lemon, I think that this is an exhibition of what the kids call crashing out in public. When you look at, since his departure from CNN, he's just been spazzing out and crashing out ever since. I remember when he reprimanded his audience because they weren't following him as much as they were following some conservative influencers and commentators. And he said to them, like, he's the one who's doing the most truth telling, and he's the one who's bringing the facts and calling truth to power. Why aren't you all following me? And we also see with Don Lemon how, he went on Piers Morgan's show and was saying that he's not right, nor is he left. He's just for truth, which we know that's anything but true. He is a leftist through and through. And then when you look at, Joy Reid, she's making all these claims against fascism, which I'm not sure she knows what the word means. But what she's doing is an exhibition of Marxism. She's a Marxist through and through. She believes in centralized power. And I think, that clip tells us everything we need to know about that. So for me, it's a tie. What they're saying is both, what both of them are saying is equally stupid, in my opinion.
2-0-1. Virgil, where do you come down?
I'm looking at both of them as equally stupid. However, I'm going to give the lead to Don Lemon, and here's why. He should have. When you go back and think about Don Lemon's trajectory, initially, he was actually on the air talking about Black fatherlessness and the need to have Black men in the homes. There was a time when he was honest about things, where he would say things like that were helpful for the Black community. Since then, he's come on and I guess needed to appeal to his leftist donors to the degree that he's acting as if the whole world is about to crumble down because of white-on-white violence or white crime or white criminality. And the idea that white people, one of which he's quote unquote married to, I put that in air quotes because there's no such thing as gay marriage, is a white man. And so if white people are this detriment to society, white males in particular are broken. I won't even go into what Shamika Michelle just said about being broke, but how in the world is he married to one? That makes absolutely no sense in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. It's absolutely stupid. I'll just say this as it relates to Joy Reid. Her estimated worth is somewhere between $5 and $11 million. And for her to hold on to any of that after what she just claimed is fascism, she would have to call herself one as well. So none of these things make any kind of sense. They're looking outwardly rather than opening their eyes to see that everything that they're talking about actually has an inward impact and really says more about them than it does about anyone else.
That's right.
Wilfred, one of my big takeaways from these two guys back to back saying this is like a DEI commercial, that CNN and MSNBC weren't picking the best and brightest. They were actually picking perhaps two of the dumbest to put in these positions, and now left to their own devices, I mean, we get to see how disconnected they are from truth and common sense. And it's I sit there and watch that. I go, oh, no wonder Shamika Michelle would never get a job on MSNBC. No wonder Wilfred would never get a job on CNN.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why no one watches this crap, right? I mean, I think this is something that's pretty important. Like the major network news channels for a very long time went all in on diversity. They went all in on these pseudo intellectual types from the political left. And I mean, you can check how that worked. Like when Jimmy Kimmel briefly got canceled, I looked up his numbers, and in the core demographic, whatever that 11, 18 to 49, he had 129,000 viewers. I mean, Jason, you're, I assume, beating that number by a good margin. I have 150,000 followers on Twitter. So to some extent, this is a facade. You have this sort of, this is the real media. This is what's on in airports. There's nobody's paying attention to it at all. And I mean, Don Lemon, he's not even a part of that ecosystem anymore. He's filming YouTube shorts from his truck. So I do think that we're kind of getting to see what's behind the veil. And kind of last point here, I made a comment about Ta-Nehisi Coates on social media the other day. I had a bit of an exchange about that. But there's this whole world of these guys, and they're not all black, right? There's Professor Ibram Kendi, there's Ta-Nehisi, there's Don Lemon, there's people on the View panel that was kind of trotted out during the end of that 2020s BLM eras. These are the intellectuals. These are the experts. These are the people you have to listen to. But they're all morons. And I think most people are starting to recognize that and saying, no, we're going to find other sources of information. Anything's better than this.
I'm going to let you dwell on that for a minute. And Chad, I'm going to have you follow in on your point about Ta-Nehisi Coates, who went on, I think he's with Ezra Klein, and he's talking about how Charlie Kirk is a hate monger, and people now have found their voice and are willing to say, like, this is racial grift, it's stupid, he's a hack, and keep his book, Between the World and Me, is one of the best-selling books, and he's been celebrated as this brilliant writer. And Wilfred, I look at this, and it makes me question everything I've been told about the past. Like, this is why I look at someone like James Baldwin and say, man, they told me James Baldwin was this great writer, and it makes me suspicious of everything that they celebrate, that Ta-Nehisi Coates was supposed to be this great intellectual thinker, and he's just not. He's a more polished, smarter sounding version of Don Lemon, but you can only dress that up so much. Wilfred?
Yeah, I mean, so good chance for a plug there, big bro. I mean, I wrote a book actually called Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me about this problem, that we've had people that are on the center left to the left that come from maybe 20 colleges total, running the media, running academia for decades in the USA. So yeah, a lot of these narratives about the past aren't necessarily any more true than what we're told about today. That's a very important point. In the book, I mean, I talk briefly about white flight. And that's presented as the idea that in the 1960s, in cities that had long been integrated, I mean, you're talking about Detroit, you're talking about Cleveland, white people just suddenly got astonishingly racist and for no reason at all left their old neighborhoods. And what really happened was that you saw mass migration from the South. This is the last part of the Great Migration. You saw the start of that new wave of immigration, Hart-Celler immigration. And at the same time, you saw liberal city governments basically stop enforcing the law. So you had the MLK riots, you had the JFK riots, you had the Watts riots, and people eventually said, to bleep with this and left those communities. And you can track that, and I do track that in the book. So the idea that this is just, there's unprovoked, nothing to do with crime, racism from those white devils, like that's what I was taught in school. And I think there were a lot of things that were taught in school that just weren't so. Gay marriage was mentioned a couple times on this panel. At the time, I supported that to some extent. I think the idea was, well, this is it. This is the end. This is the last civil rights movement. And I see panelists shaking their heads. No, immediately after that happened, it was trans rights. It was the transition to something else. And the story about what had just been pursued changed. So, yeah, I think that happens. That happens pretty often, Jason.
Chad, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I think I'm right about one of the books that I thought of in recent months. I was reading up on, and I read it as a kid, but I think it's Richard Wright's book, Native Son. I read it as a kid. Everyone says it's this great book. And then here in the last few months, I went back and looked at it and read descriptions of what I read. And I'm like, this is utter trash. And they had me believing this was some great piece of literature, all-time great. And you know, James Baldwin. When I was a kid, I didn't know much about him, but I just know that he was supposed to be this great black writer, and he wasn't, and he's not, and neither is Ta-Nehisi Coates. And just your reaction to that, Chad?
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, with Native Son, it has a political purpose, and that purpose is to convince readers that the issue of crime has to do with poverty and it has to do with race. And as a result of this, the call to action, and you hear this and you see this from those who teach Native Son to students, is there needs to be an overhaul of our system and in our economy. And we need to usher in some kind of redistribution economy that is, in a sense, meant to soften or to slow the growth of crime. If we had redistributionist policies, if we lived in a society from each according to their ability to each according to their need, then we would see less crime. So that's what the actual goal of books like Native Son are. The same is true of Invisible Man, books that we were told were
Invisible
great
Man's
pieces
the
of
other one,
American
yes.
literature. Yeah. And so when you look at people like Ta-Nehisi Coates, or you mentioned James Baldwin and others, what their work is reminiscent of cultural Marxism. And we see cultural Marxism permeating throughout the institutions, whether you're talking about the universities, whether you're talking about entertainment, whether you're talking about literature, so on and so forth. And I mean, this dates all the way back to W.E.B. Du Bois. I mean, he's another one who we were told was this kind of great thinker and great leader. He was an avowed communist, and he's been a communist for a very long time. He wouldn't become a part of the Communist Party formally until, you know, well into his older years. But the reality of it is, when you look at a lot of these kind of peddlers of race grievance in academia, in literature, in entertainment, I mean, in sports even, you see people like LeBron James and others, there seems to be this kind of rite of passage if you want to be considered a part of the mainstream. And that rite of passage is to kiss the ring of cultural Marxism. And your goal becomes to embitter your followers, your fans, those who listen to you, to embitter you perpetually, that you might be ripe for legislation, for politicians who come along and promise liberation, promise equality and equity and all the things. And the reality of it is, if you can change public opinion in that way, it has electoral effects downstream. And so that's, I mean, leftist Marxists, they kind of pride themselves in storytelling. They pride themselves in the ability to not only call truth to power, as you know, as far as the political process is concerned, but also to mobilize the masses and to emotionalize the masses into being ripe and ready for a kind of Marxist utopia. And the reason they do this is because they understand, and maybe not them, because I think that they are dupes for ideological subversion, and they just kind of do what they're told and they dance how they're told to the tune. But the brighter ones among them, the more crafty ones among them, understand full well that everything that Joy Reid was saying in her little clip about not wanting to be overtaxed, about, you know, wanting to be an autonomous individual living in the United States where you're not, your rights are not infringed upon by the federal government and so on. They understand that that is desirable to a lot of people. And so if you can, in a sense, knock people off their square, get them angry, get them upset, get them embittered, they'll be all the more willing to collectivize and call for the government to come in and do something about the thing that they're grieved about. And that's the purpose. That's the name of the game.
Shamika, be patient with me. Virgil, be patient with me, because I gotta ask Wilfred this follow-up question, then I'm going to come with a different version to you all. But when Chad just mentioned Invisible Man, and that is the actual book. And I do remember, I read Native Son, and I know I know the agenda behind that. But the book that I definitely remember reading and just reread or read a description of, The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and just how sexually perverted that book is. If you go back, and I'm like, and they had me read this as a kid. Every other Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man. It's like, and it's got all this sexual perversion stuff in it. And that's not even my question. My question is to Wilfred, to you as a college professor and educator, is the book that's still on my shelf that I love and have had young relatives read. I've read it. I probably read the book 3 or 4 times. Love it as a movie. But To Kill a Mockingbird, is that a great book, or is that just more leftist propaganda?
Well, that book, I think, is both. And I will say, when you look at the stuff from the 1960s, so I actually reached over to my bookshelf. I'm a black man, and I found Soul on Ice by Elridge Cleaver, which is another one of those books
Read it?
that everyone in an edgy high school class was assigned. And I mean, I recently reread that book again, and the guy was a rapist. I mean, he told some interesting stories about conflict with the police or how to make money, but a big part of the book, about 20 pages, was him chasing down women with a knife. And this was just sort of black and white, by the way. And this was just sort of played off like, well, of course he was a rapist. He didn't have enough resources. And I think he taught in a couple colleges. I mean, so that's something that you really have to keep in mind about all this content. Like, this was viewed as revolutionary material. It was intentionally put in the pipeline for normal kids. We're seeing the same thing today, by the way, with the LGBTQAI plus content. Like, every third children's book, if you go with your girl to the library, is about like a giraffe that wants to be a dolphin or something like that. And I mean, it's pretty obvious what the message is. To Kill a Mockingbird is a little different in that is it's a good story. I'd still call it a very good book. You know, people named their kids Atticus, and they meant well when they did it. The problem with that, of course, is that it is a preset storyline that did happen sometimes, but was never the majority. It was never the reality of crime or of racial interaction. So the whole thing is, a black man is accused of raping a white woman. A man is accused of raping a woman if you get rid of the adjectives. And it turns out that, of course, he's innocent. The woman set him up. I mean, it's sort of the one narrative about that time in the South that you could tell. I mean, when I wrote my book, one of the things that surprised me was that there are only about 5,000 lynchings all time in the USA. About 2,000 of them were of whites and Native Americans, and a lot of the people were guilty. That doesn't excuse a mob breaking through the police line and going to the courthouse. But I mean, there were, in a lot of the cases, lynching of Italians in New Orleans, people were accused of shooting the police chief, and they probably did it. So those are the 3 things that I picked up as an adult. And you realize, oh, even the narratives that are real, there was oppression, there was racial conflict in the South, those are wildly exaggerated. Those are channeled into a particular pipe. You're not going to talk about black crime or poor white crime or even desegregation. You're going to talk about just this endless fantasy of oppression. That's what's being taught.
Shamika and Virgil, this is where I'm going to bring it to you guys. He's take Emmett Till and how much focus has been on that with no telling. It's in the movie, shockingly, but like black men participated in the beating and killing of Emmett Till. That's never centered. But my whole point about all these books, you know, Virgil's closer to my age than Shamika, but we all grew up at a time when we would read these books, and it helped shape our worldview that our whole life is centered around what happened between us and white people. And that's kind of our worldview. And I got to a point where I was like, is that really my reality? Is that, you know, when I was growing up in the hood in Indianapolis, how much of my interaction was actually with white people? Wasn't my whole life about me and my family and my friends off of 38th and Grand Boulevard in Indianapolis? What am I doing? And so there's this shaping of young minds through these novels, through these books, through this educational system that convinces you whatever happens between you and white people is far more important than whatever happens to you between you and black people and you and your family. It makes the white man your God. And it's a very subtle, clever thing that they're doing. That was my experience as I look back at my educational experience. Shamika, does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. I feel like everything we learned kind of centered around that, so much so that I remember I started teaching my children that, and my daughter had a project to do at school, and it was something like, if you could design your own world, or if you were over Earth, how would it be? And she did her project with a black Barbie on top. So it was run by women. She made the Barbie have an afro, because we both took some of our hair and put it on, and held the Barbie's arm up with the fist. And at the time, we were living in a 4-bedroom, 3.5-bath house with 2 Mercedes and an Escalade in the driveway. Yet she was thinking that black people are so oppressed and that white people needed to be gone from the earth so that we could be better. And something dawned on me then, like, she is actually in a better position than many of the white and Hispanic kids that she's going to school with. What am I teaching her? So I'm so glad that I had that kind of aha moment when they were very young, so that I could start going back and unteaching some of the things that I learned. And I'm still going through that. There was a time when I hadn't heard of the term cultural Marxism, and I hold clothes for a very long time. One, because I've had 3 children and I didn't get fat and out of shape, yay me. But 2, because I don't like to shop. And so the other day I pulled out a shirt that I thought I was going to wear, and I looked at it, and on the shirt it says, "I love my roots." But it was this head of a woman, and the strands of hair were all these different people who were into cultural Marxism. And I saw Angela Davis, and I thought about just how in school we were trained to think Angela Davis was this strong black woman that we should want to grow up and be just like her. And I was thinking, my goodness, I've had this shirt for so long, but I can't even wear it anymore, because so many of the people on there, I would not believe with their I would not agree with their ideology now, and I just can't promote it. So yes, we were definitely trained to think a certain way, and I no longer buy into it.
Yeah.
Virgil, I want you to
Yeah.
chime in here.
Yeah, just we've been subject to, for decades now, impactful narratology. And that's really what's happened for quite some time. Whether it was James Baldwin in the 60s and 70s, or whether it's Ta-Nehisi Coates today, we have been subject to their narrative that they've crafted for black people to believe. And we, unfortunately, don't go check out the sources. We love a story. And so going back and looking, you mentioned Emmett Till, going back and looking at actual reports of what took place during the time is not something that the average person is actively doing or engaged in. They've accepted the narrative that's been given, the cultural narrative that's been given, and usually it's been given by cultural Marxists. And then as a result, we believe those ideas and then press them forward and tell those stories to our children and our children's children. What's interesting about men like Baldwin, men like Coates, is that their stories are empowered by white liberals who bring them into academia. And so for all of the angst and anger that they have toward white people, as if white people have done them wrong and have oppressed them for decades, these are the same white people welcoming into academic spaces and places for them to actually tell these stories to the applause of white people and their own, self-congratulating themselves because they've listened to this quote unquote black story, and the story gets passed around. It's given validity because of the fact that it was told in an academic setting. And so this whole narratology, all of this ideological framework gets just spun up to the point where people like Shamika, her daughters, they believe what they've been told, and they have no framework, no foundation by which to go and examine the truth until they come across a story like or a conversation like the one we're having, whether they engage historians like Chad Jackson, our brother Wilford here, who's telling what really took place so that people can go back and look. But most of the times, we're the ones who are mitigated to, hey, those are just Uncle Toms. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. They have no idea what truth is, and they've sold out. When the reality is, those who have sold them out are the ones who are subscribing to white supremacy. And the white supremacy they subscribe to is the idea that whites every day wake up able to oppress you and I in some way, shape, or form. And that's what's the problem.
Help us grow the Fearless Army. Pound that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with all your fearless friends.